Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're going to be looking at entrepreneurship. So the module number is 218, and we're going to be focusing on questions 1, 3, 4, and 5. So as always, we're going to look at the questions and try and understand what the questions are asking for, as well as identifying the key words within the questions, because that's equally as important as the question itself. We're going to be looking at entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, as there's a kind of significant difference between entrepreneurship and as a process, and entrepreneurs as individuals or different people. We're going to be looking at characteristics of internal and external behaviors, and reviewing later on the process of business startups in terms of how you classify them, different types of setups, as well as the processes you might take, and a overall marketing strategy, a plan of the whole business or product or service idea that you're looking at. So let's go straight into the questions. So question 1 says, appraise the theories and practice of entrepreneurship, enterprise, and innovation. So appraise the theories of practice of entrepreneurship, enterprise, and innovation. So we're going to be looking at entrepreneurial type businesses and enterprises and innovation, and we're going to be touching upon some of these issues. Question 3 says, explore the behaviors, characteristics, competences, and personalities of a range of entrepreneurs, and evaluate against students' own behaviors, characteristics, personality, and competences to assess their potential as an entrepreneur. So the question is saying, what are the key characteristics, competences, personalities, successful skills that entrepreneurs have, or successful entrepreneurs have? And then let's look at your own, and how do you compare? Do you have some of these skills, characteristics, personalities that other successful entrepreneurs have? Because that would be relevant to the case example that you're actually doing. Question 4 says to evaluate internal and external factors affecting the development and creation of an entrepreneurial culture. So, how do you develop this entrepreneurial culture in, individuals, or even within the company itself? How is this created? But this is about how people think and how people feel, and their motives and motivation to actually doing things. So we're going to be looking at a model to kind of like assess all the different elements that are linked into the factors affecting the development and creation of an entrepreneurial culture. And then question 5 says to analyze and discuss the process of a business startup from conception to execution. So we'll be giving a brief outline in terms of the potential different stages in terms of a startup from conception to execution. And then later on, we'll be going through a few more in-depth areas in terms of the mission, vision, aims, objectives, the situation analysis, the marketing strategy, and then a brief touch on the implementation of the marketing mix, the basic 4 Bs. So let's have a look at some of the keywords. So in question 1, the keyword there is to appraise, and appraise means to assess the value or quality of. So to assess the value or quality of. In question 3, the keyword there is to explore, and that means to inquire into or discuss a subject in detail. Question 4 is evaluate. Evaluate in the English dictionary means to weigh up. To weigh up is to look for the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of something in what the question is looking for. And then in question 5, the keyword there is to analyze, and to analyze is to state how one factor affects another. So if we look at the current coronavirus, we say, well, how has the coronavirus affected me? Coronavirus has affected me because now I am now working from home. And I'm staying and following the government guidelines in terms of minimal contact and so on and so forth. So how one thing affects another. Now, so a suggested layout depends on the case study that you're given to complete. One possible layout could be, provide an introduction into your specific case study. Appraise the theories and practice of entrepreneurship, enterprise, and innovation. Then, look at the behaviors, characteristics, skills, and traits, core traits of specific entrepreneurs out there that you've seen, and then kind of look at your own and compare them. Evaluate, look at the pros and cons of the internal and external factors affecting the development and creation of entrepreneurial culture, and here you can use a model that I'm going to provide. And then analyze and discuss the process of a business startup from conception to execution. Now, obviously, these relate to the assessment criteria. Now, depending upon how your assignment brief is written and the task you have to produce, it will depend upon the layout and the sequence that you would adopt. So for the current class has to do a 15-minute presentation of launching a new product or service, which is going to also state how it benefits the locality, and you'll be presenting in front of a panel of 3 or 4 people, and you'll be selling your product or service, and you'll be selling yourself to try and get funding to start up your product or service. So that's the current case example, 15 minutes with an additional 5 minutes for questions from the panel. So in that sense, you might actually slightly change the sequence of how you're going to carry out this layout. But then obviously it depends upon the case example, and you would adjust it accordingly. So we're gonna look at we're gonna touch on entrepreneurship first, and then we're gonna move on to entrepreneurs, and then the characteristics of entrepreneurs and some examples. And then later on, after all of that, we're going to move back to entrepreneurship. But let's just look at the differences between entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, because there is a significant difference between the two. Okay, entrepreneur Steve Jobs from 1955 to 2011. So one kind of like modern definition of entrepreneurship by Scott Shane. It says that entrepreneurship is an activity that involves the discovery, evaluation, and exploitation of opportunities to introduce new goods and services, ways of organizing markets, processes, and new materials through organizing efforts that previously had not existed. In other words, how you're going to conduct your business. And this is like entrepreneurship, the process of conducting your business. And he talks about lots of different things there. Opportunities to introduce goods and services. How do you introduce goods and services? You may have existing products in the marketplace, and you may introduce them in a different way. Rather than going with a retail store, you might just go straight online or direct to the end consumer, for example. Processes. Tesco's are bringing in new processes to reduce their costs. Cross-stocking, for instance, where they don't stock their products, like big electrical TVs, whereas the company that manufactures them stocks the product. They get the sales in, they email the orders over to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer sends it out direct, so they don't have any holding costs, they don't have any distribution costs, so that is not done by Tesco's themselves. So processes, what processes? The result of processes are that it gives you a competitive advantage if you have certain processes that reduce your costs. So if you reduce your administration costs in your profit and loss account, therefore making you more profitable with additional gross profit. Howard Stevenson, the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. Okay, so you're going for your opportunity. You see an opportunity, and you need resources, but regardless, you're just going to pursue this regardless. Another definition: the founding of new business is the essence of entrepreneurial activity. So you can get a picture now in terms of what we're talking about regarding entrepreneurship. The founding of new businesses is the essence of entrepreneurial activity. Developing and conducting yourself in new business. And I suppose by new business we're looking at predominantly the private sector in terms of this business. But we'll come on to more in terms of the private sector and its setup and its structure later on. Richard Cantillon, 1697 to 1734. The entrepreneur is a specialist in taking on risk. He insures workers by buying their products or labor services for resale before consumers have indicated how much they're willing to pay. So again, even though it's mentioned entrepreneur at the top there, we're actually still talking about the organization by buying products or labor or services for resale before consumers have indicated how much they're willing to pay. So it's a bit of you're buying something before you know exactly if the consumers are actually going to actually pay for this and if there is actually a need for it. But I'm sure that someone has already done their market research beforehand anyway. Frank Knight, 1885 to 1972, talks about entrepreneur having two main functions. The two main functions, exercising responsibility to control, directing the work of others within an organization, securing the owners of productive services against uncertainty and fluctuations with the incomes. So you distinguish between risk, which is unshoreable, and uncertainty. And you don't know if you're going to actually meet your deadlines and targets. It is a risk to go into business and to start your organization to sell your product or service to what you've identified as a need, to satisfy that need. But profit compensates the entrepreneur for bearing the uncertainty. Joseph Schumenter. I like Joseph Schumenter. We will talk more about him later on. Joseph Schumenter, 1883 to 1950. In 1934, he said, implements change, creative destruction within markets through the carrying out of new combinations. 1942, the entrepreneurial function does not essentially consist of either inventing anything or otherwise creating the conditions which the enterprise exploits. It consists of getting things done, doing things. One of the biggest killers of any business, some say, is procrastination and not getting things done. A lot of what an entrepreneur does on a day-to-day basis is not entrepreneurial. Okay. So really we are talking about a synthesis of ideas when we're talking about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. We can see it in terms of two main camps. One main camp could be the discovery, evaluation, and exploitation of opportunities, and the second camp is really starting new business. I can see it in both those camps really. Discovery, evaluation, exploitation of opportunities, definitely. Starting a new business, yes. And maybe a crossover of both of them really. Starting a new business, but then also exploiting the opportunities, even in terms of processes and practices, in terms of maybe what other businesses are not doing within the industry, and so you can exploit that by doing those practices that other companies are not doing within your market sector to make you more competitive or to give you that competitive edge, perhaps. So, when we look at a synthesis of entrepreneurship, previous, economists do a nice job of defining entrepreneurship, concerned with decisions surrounding new profit opportunities. So we're still talking about a business concerned with assembling resources, all in the midst of uncertainty. But they don't really address, who the entrepreneur is. Or even more importantly, who the successful entrepreneur is. Okay, so we've talked about entrepreneurship, and we are going to come back later onto entrepreneurship, but we're going to kind of move on to the entrepreneur and kind of see now, focus more on the entrepreneur. So we talked about entrepreneurship. Now we're going to be talking about entrepreneur, and then we're looking at the characteristics and looking at various models to look at their personalities and how various factors affect them in terms of this entrepreneurial culture. And then later on we'll be coming back onto entrepreneurship in terms of organizations and innovation and creativity and processes. So So now we're going to move on to entrepreneurs. And we can look at different types of entrepreneurs. In Wenckels and Thurick, 1999, differentiate between three types of entrepreneurs: the humanitarian entrepreneurs from Michael Schumacher, intrapreneurs, and managerial you know, entrepreneurs. So the humanitarian entrepreneurs are basically micro to small sized organizations, entrepreneurs who start up small businesses. Okay, and now when we'll come to defining what we mean by micro, small, medium, and large in a second. So humanitarian predominantly startup, micro and small type organization businesses. And when we look at intrapreneurs are entrepreneurs who still are entrepreneurs, but they work for a company and then coming up with new products and services and ideas, or new processes and practices within their own company. So they are entrepreneurs but within a company, so they are employees, so they are intrapreneurs. And then we have managerial type managerial entrepreneurs, predominantly organizations where you see the humanitarian type entrepreneurs have now been successful and they've grown, and now they're no longer the humanitarian type entrepreneur, they now morph into a managerial entrepreneur. Now let's go back to what we mean by small, medium, and large. So there are different definitions, but from different sources. But one source looks at the definition of an organization size by the number of employees, for example. So if you were to take a micro business can be anything from 0 to 9 employees, a micro business. And then a small organization would be anything from 10 to 49 employees. So anything from micro and small combined can be from 0 to 49 employees. A medium sized organization would be from 50 to 249 employees, and a large organization would be that company that has more than 250 employees working for them. So we can define it by the number of employees working for a company in terms of micro, small, medium, and large. So when we're specifically referring to the humanitarian entrepreneurs, we're saying that these humanitarian entrepreneurs will have, if they are micro and small, either micro between 0 and 9 employees, or between 10 and 49 employees. You can also define it by company turnover in the financial year as well, but I'm just haven't defined it by the number of employees working for that company. We look at the humanitarian type entrepreneurs, often develop into they often change when they grow, as I said before, from the humanitarian to the managerial business owners. Okay, they work innovatively to create new products to sell on their marketplaces or strengthen existing ones. When we look at the intrapreneurs, are employees. They implement the essential principles of entrepreneurship, but not for themselves. Okay, they use their own ventures, but within, and for the good of the organization for whom they work for. And we'll see sometimes that you might be an intrapreneur and you might have a very good idea, product or service, and then you might decide that your idea is so good, and then that you have other ideas that you might want to start up yourself, and then you might start up, and then you might become a humanitarian entrepreneur. And as you grow, then you can become a humanitarian entrepreneur and morph into a managerial type entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs, by risking their time, reputation, and a job, the embodiment of entrepreneurship within a large firms. In some occasions, entrepreneurs progress to start new firms on their own or with others, again, thus becoming a humanitarian type entrepreneur. So, when they do, they come from being intrapreneurs to becoming humanitarian entrepreneurs. As managerial business owners, they are included in these three as well. Manager and business owners are seen in a formal sense because many people confuse them with real entrepreneurs. If we've seen, Dyson, for example, Dyson, when he first started, he had his idea and he tried to get funding from a range of different banks, and no one in the beginning would give him finance or funding for his new product idea, the bagless, Hoover. He even went to Hoover to offer his product to the company and they rejected it. So, eventually he kept on going and he managed to get funding, and now the Dyson is taken over, the Hoover type, Hoover of today's environment. So we can see how Dyson moved on from a humanitarian type entrepreneur to begin with, and now he's more of a managerial type entrepreneur. Nevertheless, even though he's managing his big company with more than 250 employees incorporated within it, he is at the heart of it still an entrepreneur, but he's a managerial entrepreneur. As we said before, humanitarian entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs are most often found, in the small firms, and include many things like franchises and shopkeepers. All the people that you see out there who have their own business predominantly are humanitarian type entrepreneurs starting their own business. Even a window cleaner, humanitarian type entrepreneur. So there's a lot of people who are and have the entrepreneurial type spirit, which we will look at the characteristics after these. They don't have growth as profit as the main goal, and they aren't characterized by innovative practices. So, here, what is the main reason why people want to start businesses for themselves? Why do they want to do it? And sometimes they may not have growth, and profit as their main goal. Obviously, they need profit to sustain themselves and to pay the bills. Otherwise, they won't be able to survive. But it may not be their main goal. Okay, and they aren't even characterized by innovative practices necessarily in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing things. So again, you see a lot of this, but nevertheless, they can still be classified as humanitarian type entrepreneurs. They have other characteristics and other traits, which may not necessarily be innovation and practices. There are other subcategories of different types of entrepreneurs. Artisan entrepreneur, a person who primarily technical skills and little business knowledge who starts a business. And you've got great technical skills but little business knowledge. Characteristics: they have technical training, they have a paternalistic approach, they have a reluctance to delegate and they want to take it all on themselves and do it all themselves. They have few sources of capital, a narrow view of strategy, personal sales effort, and short planning horizon. And then there's another category in terms of the opportunist entrepreneur. A person with both the sophisticated managerial skills and the technical skills and knowledge, who starts a business. So the opportunity entrepreneur. Characteristics: they have a broad-based education. They take a scientific approach to problems. They are willing to delegate, and they see the need to delegate because they can't do it all themselves. A broad view on strategy, diversified marketing approach, longer planning horizon, sophisticated accounting and financial control. What are the characteristics of these entrepreneurs? So, I would say successful entrepreneurs, and again, it's difficult to just say how you define success. Do you define success by the amount of profit, or how long someone has been in business? How exactly do you define success? But because success is relative from one person's perspective to another. But let's look at some characteristics of successful entrepreneurs. They have high energy levels. I do feel that when you're starting up yourself, and even if, for instance, you start up a local shop, a sweet shop, or hairdressers, or any business to start up with, you need high energy levels to put a lot of time and effort for yourself. You need self-confidence and a belief in yourself, because there'll be a lot of negative people around you and a lot of negative things out there. You'll face a lot of obstacles and difficulties, and if you don't have self-confidence, then you may not succeed because you may give up. You have a tolerance for ambiguity, self-reliance and desire for independence. Again, we talked about, why people will open up their own businesses. A lot of times people want to open up their own businesses because they want, they want to be independent. They don't want to be reliant upon someone else. They don't want someone else to take all the credit. They want to see for themselves that what they're doing, they're making their own money, and they want to be independent and free. They want freedom. High need for achievement, flexibility. They need, passion and action orientated. I do feel that entrepreneurs are genuinely passionate about whatever they're doing, and they believe in whatever they're doing, whatever it is. And they are action orientated. They do take action. They don't just sit back and wait for things to happen, or just expect other people to do things. And then they have an internal locus of control. I agree with these a lot of these things. Characteristics of entrepreneurs. They have a commitment, determination, and perseverance. And I do believe you need that for success, because nothing runs smoothly, and you're always going to face obstacles. You're always going to come up with problems. And the question is, do you have persistence and determination to overcome the obstacles? Because if you don't, then you're going to give up and you're going to fail. So yes, you must have determination and persistence, a drive to achieve. You've got to have high levels of drive. Opportunity orientation. You've got to see an opportunity. You've got to be a risk taker. Opportunity, you take it. You take a risk. And again, characteristics, I see these entrepreneurs as being risk takers. Persistent problem solving, constantly thinking 24 hours a day in terms of what's going wrong and what are the issues within your workplace, and then you're letting your mind kind of solve the problems, because the answers will come to you. Seeking feedback, internal locus of control, tolerance for ambiguity. Again, definitely characteristics of entrepreneurs, of good entrepreneurs. Calculated risk taking. Yeah, I do believe that entrepreneurs take calculated risks, tolerance of failure, and yeah, they've got to have some tolerance for failure as well, because not everything's going to go, right. Not everyone's going to think. Not everything's going to go smoothly. Must have high energy levels, definitely. In some areas, there's lots of creativity and innovativeness, and even on small businesses, you see entrepreneurs having a degree of innovativeness in terms of what they do and creativity. They kind of have a vision in terms of what they want to do, where they want to go, and what they want to achieve, definitely, and how they want to operate as well. They have self-confidence and optimism, definitely positive thinking, optimistic people, and self-confident. You've got to believe in yourself. Independence and team building, definitely. So let's have a look at some different successful entrepreneurs that people know about. Henry Ford. He was 83 when he died. Henry Ford was one of the few men that made mainstream, automobiles become a reality. He was born into a family of farmers, who originated from England and Ireland. Did not come from the wealthiest of families, but not poverty-stricken either. In his early years, his father gave him a timepiece to fix, and he took it all apart and then he put it back all together. And then later on, he started doing that and fixing other people's timepieces for them. So he could take things apart at such a young age and then put it back together. He suffered from dyslexia, but he didn't give up. He didn't give up. He had persistence to keep going and to achieve. If we look at Thomas Edison, Thomas Edison, his first motivation and persistence, which makes him a true entrepreneur. Even after thousands of failures. If you look at the story of how he, developed the light bulb, after 5,000 failed experiments, I believe a reporter came to him and said, "Mr. Edison, you've tried 5,000 times, you failed. Don't you know that the world is supposed to be lit by gasoline?" kerosene. And the story goes that Thomas Edison replied to him, "My dear boy, um, I have successfully identified 5,000 ways how not to invent the light bulb." He then went on to another 5,000 experiments to, you know, to determine how the filament and the light bulb should be constructed for it to work. So he did 10,000 experiments. So he was determined, he was persistent, but equally, Thomas Edison made as many failures as he had successes, or probably more failures than he had successes. And he wasn't disillusioned by the failures. He just kept going at persistence and determination, and he has self-confidence within himself. And he didn't believe that one failure would put him off from continually going on and achieving what he needed to achieve and going for what he wanted to go for. He had a terrible upbringing in terms of money sense. He was a very poorly child, ill a lot of the times in his early lives. He had a severe ear infection that rendered him deaf in one ear, and some people said he was deaf in both ears. As a boy, he developed scarlet fever and almost died because of it. And at the same time, as a young lad, he saved the life of a toddler who almost got hit by a train. So yeah. Also, he went on to make thousands of inventions. Lots of them failed, and a lot of them succeeded. He was a very patient and passionate man, motivated by success. And as it said before, he failed equally as many times as he succeeded. So again, look at the characteristics and traits of successful people like Thomas Edison. Winfrey's. We know that Oprah Winfrey's was a very, 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 very successful in terms of a talk show. Absolutely amazing. But the question is, why was she so successful? It was said that she was so compassionate and she understood people, and that came across. That came across from her audience. But why did this come across? What helped her to be so compassionate, to listen and to show the empathetic view to her audience, that her audience saw was true, was right, was real? Well, if you look at her upbringing, she was subjected to sexual attacks when she was younger. She was made pregnant and at the age of 14 lost her baby. And so she had a terrible upbringing in terms of sexual attack and so on and so forth. And she later, revealed this to her audience in an amazing talk show. But her success is due to her personality and how she came across. And she had specific empathetic characteristics that other people probably don't have because they haven't been through what she's been through. So again, it just goes to show that our upbringing and contextual and environmental contexts affect our way of thinking and our emotional state, and that again affects our tendencies for entrepreneurial type characteristics, which could lead us to take action. If we look at Oprah Winfrey's as well, she founded a company in Harbo Studios, which spelled backwards is Oprah, spelled backwards. She's got over 250 employees. And she co-founded various other medias to help attract over 50 million viewers. She has over 2.7 billion, so she's a multi-billionaire. And she's successful and she's happy. So yeah, she's been very, very successful in terms of what she's done and what she's achieved. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world. But when you think about his career and everything else, way back into the age of 13, he was into personal computers, and he, with some other of his friends as well, would take apart computers to its component stages to understand the workings of it at the age of 13. and then understand the programming side of it as well. So at a very, very early age, he was very interested in computers and programming and how it all worked and being able to strip it all apart and put it all back together. Bill Allen and his friends, studied the inner workings and making notes of coding language and tried to decipher it to understand how the computer worked. Okay, and later on, they were eventually banned from the DCPDTP10 after they were caught exploiting code bugs, which allowed them to extend, the amount of time that had been allocated on the machine. So Bill Gates is another example of someone who is, again, he had a specialist talent within computers and software. His talent, his passion, his determination, his persistence to keep going and to overcome. And his technical expertise to innovation to come up with new systems, software and hardware. So again, lots of common type characteristics that all of these entrepreneurs have. If we look at Peter, Jones' 10 golden rules for entrepreneurs. His 10 golden rules were: you must have a vision, you must be able to use your influence, you must be confident, you must be able to build up your confidence, you must act as if, make a commitment and stick to it. You must aim for results. So you have a target and you aim for that target. And when you're doing things, you must get your timings right. Persevere. You must be caring, take action, and use your intuition. Use your intuition. So here we're saying these are the type of kind of like skills and characteristics and personality traits that Peter Jones is saying that you should have. So if he thinks like that, then it's probably right to say that this is the skills, characteristics and personality that he has, if he's suggesting that one should do this. So again, judging by what this successful entrepreneur is saying, these are some of the key skills and characteristics. So really we've kind of looked at we've touched on what we mean by entrepreneurship, and now we are looking at we've looked at who are different types of entrepreneurs, and we looked at the humanitarian, intrapreneurs and managerial, as well as the artisan and the opportunity type entrepreneur. And we've kind of looked at the key skills and characteristics, and you have to compare that to yourself. You have to look at yourself and you have to say, well, what characteristics and skills do I have? I mean, do I have high energy levels? Do I have a vision? Do I have a mission? Do I overcome? Am I optimistic? Am I positive? Do I have a key technical skills in specific areas? What exactly do I have? So you need to look at that and then make a comparison. Okay. The other thing that we wanted to look at was the evaluating the internal and external factors, affecting the development and creation of an entrepreneurial culture. So, we're saying to ourselves, well, what are the internal and external factors affecting the development of an entrepreneurial culture? So we're looking at ourselves as an entrepreneur in terms of that entrepreneurial type culture. So we could be looking at the entrepreneurial personality, because how we think will affect the culture within ourselves, our own way of thinking, which determines what skills and characteristic traits that we have, and that will lead into whether or not we develop businesses in terms of entrepreneurship and carry out entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial activities, developing and creating and running new businesses, either as a humanitarian or managerial or intrapreneur. So what are some of the internal and external factors that affect us? Well, we kind of have to look at how we think as people, and how we think as people in terms of our beliefs, attitudes and intentions. So our beliefs which translates into our attitudes, which then relate to our intentions, what we're going to do, what action we're going to take, will really depend upon personal factors and contextual factors affecting our lifestyle and how we're brought up, which affects our way of thinking, which affects our beliefs and thus intentions. So when we're looking at the personal factors, we're saying, what are the personal traits, demographic background, what are your values and beliefs, how you're brought up, what foods you eat, what religion you are. If you're Muslim, you don't eat pork, and so on and so forth. Determines your way of thinking and what you believe. If we look at Jack Cohen, for instance, let's try and apply this to Jack Cohen. Jack Cohen was the founder of Tesco's, and he came from a Jewish family background. And with his background, we know that his parents, his mother and father, had their own business, and they had their own tailor business. So he was brought up into, his family which had their own business. So he's brought up into business. So his parents were like humanitarian type entrepreneurs anyway, because they were doing, ready-made clothes and tailor-made clothes for the wider community. But they were Jewish in nature. So obviously they had lots of traits and characteristics that, Jack Cohen would have seen, and he would have lived with his whole life. So, in terms of making profit, in terms of, looking at innovation, getting things done, looking at the costings, saving money, and so on and so forth. And then at the same time, contextual factors, social, economic, political, cultural, technological, these factors would affect him at that time. So at that time, was the First World War, and Jack Cohen was, enrolled, and he became, due to political and social factors, political and social contextual factors affected Jack Cohen, because he now became an RAF airline pilot in the First World, not an RAF airline pilot in the First World War. And throughout that time he saved all of his money. He didn't actually spend any of his money, and maybe that was due to his values and beliefs, and his demographic background in terms of saving. Maybe he got that from his parents, and that would have led into his personal and contextual factors in terms of his family and his upbringing and his culture, together with the outbreak of the First World War, from 1914 to 1918, led to his beliefs and his personality in terms of what he believed, perceived desirability and perceived feasibility. Now, his beliefs would lead Jack Cohen to his intentions and what action he would take. So we know that throughout the time that he was an airline pilot, he saved his money during the war. But then the war came to an end, and at the end of the war, there were both moderating factors, personal, and maybe moderating factors, contextual. So, moderating factors, contextual, in terms of timing, resources, pre-eventing, participating events, happened whereby now the end of the war had come and the army had a surplus of food stocks. But if we remember that during the First World War there were rationing cards, so consumers at that time could only get a certain amount of food every single week. So they would have their rationing card, and then on that rationing card they would get maybe one loaf of bread for family, an X number of eggs, bacon, and so on and so forth, to last them for the whole week, and they would have to last on that food. But now, over the 5 years during the war, that had come to an end. So this was now an end. So people were now crying out for food, because now rationing was now finished, and the army now had all this surplus of food stocks, which they no longer needed, because the army was now coming home, apart from the army that was left there to maintain stability. So if they've got all these stocks, then they have to sell these stocks within a short period of time. So the army had warehouses of food stocks, and Jack Cohen. Now, if we think, so those were the moderating factors, moderating contextual factors. But if we look at the moderating personal factors, type of levels of skill, prosperity to act, maybe he had this opportunity here. He had his money, he had saved up all his money, he hadn't spent any money, so he had this pot of money, and then so his personal factors and his desire would lead into his entrepreneurial intention. So if we look at the situation, you've got Jack Cohen in terms of his personal factors, which had developed his seeing his parents being or having their own business, being tailors, coming from a Jewish background, saving, and the philosophy there is to strive and to achieve. And then you've got the contextual factors in terms of the war, which led into his entrepreneurial perception in terms of what was happening. Now the war was finished, and now you've got moderating contextual factors and moderating personal factors, which are now leading him to say, hang on a minute, there's an opportunity here because you've got all these people that need food and are crying out for food. You've got the army, now I've got warehouses full of food, and the army are now selling these dirt cheap because they've got no use for the food, so they need to get rid of it quickly, otherwise because the food has a short life shelf span on it, so they have to get rid of it. So he has this, and he takes the opportunity, entrepreneurial intention, which leads to entrepreneurial action. And he went and he spent all his money. He bought as much food as he could do. He went into the market store, and then on the first day he sold out all of his food and he doubled his money. He took that money back, and he kept going back to the army, buying up as much food as he could, going back to the marketplace and doubling his money each time. And that's how Jack Cohen started to conduct and carry out his humanitarian type entrepreneurial activity. So being a humanitarian entrepreneur, but the entrepreneurial activity of a micro business. And later on he opened up his first shop, and he then opened up more shops, selling a range of different goods. Later on he opened up a central warehouse distribution in North London, in Edmonton, and then he had all the goods coming into one central location and then being redistributed out to the retail stores. And he changed the system from self-service to from being served to self-service. Before you would ask for every single item that you wanted, but now what was happening, he changed the way business was being done, whereby you would go and help yourself in that store, saving time and looking at the processes as well. And Tesco's has grown now. We look at Tesco's now. They have the Tesco's superstores, Tesco's high street stores, the metro stores, Tesco's express stores slightly out of town, Tesco's online. You have all the different Tesco stores catering different market segments. So we can see how Jack Cohen kind of started, and how the personal factors and the contextual factors would have affected his perception of what was happening. And then other factors at the time in terms of moderating contextual factors and moderating personal factors would have again motivated him and affected his motivation in terms of entrepreneurial intention to act, and then the entrepreneurial action taking place, which he did. Okay, so I hope that has looked at that with the case example of Jack Cohen. But we have to look at motivation. It's the motivation that gets us to want to take action. That we have a need in ourselves when the actual need, sufficiently deviates from the desired need to such an extent that we need to take action. We can take it no longer. We need to take this risk. We need to do this for ourselves to see that that at least we've tried. So it's the difference between the actual need and the desired need to such an extent where it differs, where we see that opportunity and we have to take action. So let's look at motivation. important there. The motivation is the desire to achieve a goal, combined with the energy to work towards that goal. Motivation is the basic, drive for all of our actions, and it directs our behaviors. A motive is a need for specific experiences. Okay, and we all have different needs. And sometimes, I hear people say, well, oh, you don't need that, or you don't need this. But really, everyone is different in terms of what our needs are. And one person's need may not be necessarily someone else's need. So if you're having a facelift or a nose job, one person might look at you and say, well, you look really great. You don't really need a nose job, but that person might feel in themselves, for whatever reason, that they might need this nose job to make them feel better. So, stimulated by the situation, definitely by the different motivations in terms of achievement motivation. Is based on reaching success and achieving all the aspirations in life. Okay, power motivation, is the drive to influence people and change situations. And affiliation motivation, a drive to relate, to people on a social basis. Okay, so what motivations do you have? What motivations do you have? Do you have a power motivation, affiliation motivation, achievement motivation? What is your motivation and why? So there are explicit motives. Explicit motives are expressed through deliberate choices. Achievement. I'm basically a competitive person, and I compete just for the sake of competing. Autonomy. In my work assignments, I try to be my own boss. Affiliation. When I have a choice, I try to work in a group instead of myself. Power. I seek an active role in the leadership of a group. Explicit motives. And we have to look at ourselves as well and say, what are our motives? What are our needs? What are we trying? What do we really want? There are also implicit motives as well. Implicit motives are, spontaneous impulses to act. What is going on here? Who are these people? Why? What do you think? What do they want? What will happen? Implicit motives to act. Spontaneous actions. So again, we've looked at the internal and external factors. The internal and external factors being personal factors, contextual factors, and also the situation in terms of moderating personal factors and moderating contextual factors. The right time at the right place, and taken into consideration in this, within this, in terms of the entrepreneurial intention, are the different motives. Implicit motives and explicit motives. What are the motives and the motivation in terms of why people want to act? No. Now we're going to go. So we looked at, to start off, we briefly looked at entrepreneurship, and then we went on to entrepreneurs and different types of entrepreneurs in terms of humanitarian, entrepreneurs, managerial, artisan, and opportunist type entrepreneurs. And we looked at the characteristics, and we looked at internal and external contextual and moderating factors that can affect, as well as motivation and why people act. There are other, wide range of other motivation theories as well, and why people do things what they do. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you should have covered that already. And it's basic psychological needs, safety needs, love and belonging needs, self-esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. You have Herzberg's two-factor theory, McGregor's X and Y theory, the Hawthorne studies as well, and human behavior, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of motivation theory out there which kind of give us guidelines as regards to why people do what they do, what are their motives and their motivations and their desires, to help them to take action, to be or conduct entrepreneurial type activity as an entrepreneur, depending upon the type of entrepreneur as well. So we're going to go back to now entrepreneurship, and just dig out a little bit more in terms of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is defined as the application of enterprise skills, specifically to creating and growing organizations. So again, entrepreneurship, we're talking about creating and growing organizations in order to identify and build on opportunities. An entity, person, partnership, organization, or business unit engaged, in an economic activity. Within the entity, there is the application of creative ideas and innovations to partial situations. An enterprise combines creativity, ideas, development, and problem solving with expression, communication, and practical action. An enterprise might be driven by financial gain or profit, or by social or cultural values. Definitely meeting your own needs in terms of why you want to do this. When we look at some of things that people have written, one quote I saw was, the reasonable person adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to themselves. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable people. I actually like this quote as well. It's a very good one. The reasonable person adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable persists in trying to adapt the world to themselves. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable people. People who say, no, this is the way to do it. This is the way we should do it. And it doesn't bend or conforms to that society or that group, but rather pushes the boundaries in terms of trying to achieve the vision, the mission, the beliefs that they have in their own minds in terms of what they want to achieve, because they have this desire that they want to produce this, which shows the progress sometimes of mankind. There is the opportunity and necessity entrepreneurship. Another interesting division between different types of entrepreneurship is at ACS, in 2007. And he suggests that how entrepreneurship is good for economic growth. So, when we look at entrepreneurs, different types of entrepreneurs carrying out entrepreneurship, then it's good for the economy, and it's good for the economy worldwide, one could argue. ACS suggests a differentiation between, opportunity entrepreneurship and necessity entrepreneurship. So again, we're looking at different kind of elements of entrepreneurship: opportunistic, and necessity entrepreneurship. Opportunity entrepreneurship being an active choice to start a new enterprise based on the perception that an unexploited or underexploited business opportunity exists, and necessity entrepreneurship. Having to become an entrepreneur because you have no better option. And a way of seeing, opportunity entrepreneurship is to view it how it works in the actual economy. The opportunity entrepreneur, would be the person who starts a business because he sees a gap in the market and nobody else sees or dares to exploit that gap. Yeah, agreed. A lot of the times, yes. But do you have the determination and persistence? Do you have the belief in yourself to be able to do that? Because again, there is a degree of uncertainty and risk here because you're not guaranteed to make it work. He is the size of opportunities. He dares to take the risk of developing an idea into reality. On the other hand, necessity entrepreneur emerges because no other possibilities for work exist, or conditions, put by, employers aren't satisfactory, with individual expectations. Again, you take action, you put things into place because, because no one else, what you have is not good enough in front of you and no one else is taking action. So you go ahead, if you're an entrepreneur, and you go and create it yourself and you do it yourself, which is better or more efficient. When we look at, opportunity and necessity entrepreneurship, a possible scenario where necessity entrepreneurship might emerge as if the economy or of a country faces an economic decrease or negative development. Okay, consumption decreases, companies' production is decreased, the amount of labor employees needed is lessened, meaning people get fired and companies might face bankruptcy. Okay, there might be a necessity to change. If we look at the current coronavirus in terms of businesses staying afloat and surviving throughout this period, we see a lot of the retail manufacturers in the UK changing their production facilities in the interim to help make PPE, to help and make more face masks, to make face masks for the general public. So they've tried to keep their businesses going by adapting their processes. Out of necessity, they need to. Otherwise, how long can they keep going without any money coming into the business? So they've got to look at every opportunity to make any money that they can. Otherwise, they won't survive. So when we look at the economic impact of entrepreneurial firms, we can see the economic impact in terms of innovation to the country, new ways of doing things, job creation. There are so many people who are employed within, as a sole trader or as a micro firm. It has an impact on society and impact on larger firms. Some of the key concepts, Ray 2015 defined the following as concepts as follows: enterprise, the application of creative ideas to practical situations; entrepreneur, a person who acts as an enterprising way, and who identifies or creates and acts or an opportunity. So that's the entrepreneur. So you've got the enterprise and you've got the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship, the ability to turn ideas into action through the entrepreneur to the enterprise, entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurial management, applying entrepreneurial practices to the organization environment, including self-employment, new venture creation, and small business management. Managing in enterprising ways in corporate, public, and social organizations of all sizes. Opportunity. An opportunity is the potential for change, improvement, or advantage arising from our action in the circumstances where the value can be created. And we can look at some models of innovation. If we're looking at innovation, we've got either a technological push or market pull. Technological push is the push by the research and development, and then the manufacturing and the marketing. We can see this with the smartphones from Apple and from Huawei and Samsung. The research and development, new technical developments, manufacturing, and then the marketing, technological push. Because ultimately it makes life easier for the end consumer in terms of speed, in terms of online banking, in terms of films, in terms of games, in terms of all sorts of activities. Market pull, here we've got it the other way around, where you have the marketing being done, the research and development, and then the manufacturing, and then providing the product to the end user. Also, other cyclical models of innovation and interconnected cycles. I'm not going to go into too much detail in here, but at the heart of it is entrepreneurship. And even though you've got at the heart of it, you've got entrepreneurship, you've got a range of different things which are all connected in the process of entrepreneurship, getting things done, actually carrying out that business activity, which includes the product creation. It's not just the product creation. Is how you manage your whole business. It's technological research. What technology can you use in your business? Scientific exploration. What methods are available here, and market transitions. So we need to look at these. The customer side. Social insights. Technical capabilities, and technical functions, and see how they're all integrated within the process of entrepreneurship. Because if we think of it from an accounting perspective, all these things need to be taken into consideration. they say that the lifeblood of any business are new products, and without new products, your business won't survive in the long term. And each product will have a product life cycle from introduction to growth to maturity to decline. And if you think about it from an accountancy perspective, you have your cash flow, and most businesses can fail because they don't have enough cash flow, which leads into your profit and loss account. Your sales minus your cost of goods sold gives you your gross profit, minus your administration charges gives you your net profit. But it's in your you either increase your sales, sell the product to meet a need, that's great, that's fine. But then if your administration costs are too high, then you can actually make a net loss. Or if you're not making enough profit and your competitor is making more profit than you, then they have more resources to reinvest back into the business to give them a competitive advantage over you. So in order for your production, your processes and your practices within the business of entrepreneurship needs to be taken, all these things need to be taken into consideration. Again, if you look at Tesco's, they have within their processes technological research, they have scientific explanation in terms of all the things that they're doing. They are implementing lean, total quality management, continuous improvement. If you look at Zara started with one shop in Spain, and now they have nearly 2,000 stores. They turn over almost 20 billion US dollars in profit annually. And their success is not just based on selling a product, it's based on vertically integrating backwards, just in time management, utilizing 85% of their own factories and warehouses, changing the cycle time down from the catwalk to the idea to their shops, where they've got a different system in place by looking at market research to reduce that whole time down from 6 months to 6 weeks. So they're very, very successful in all their processes and practices, not just about the product and selling the product. It's the whole business of entrepreneurship, the whole process of entrepreneurship, which takes into consideration this cycle model of innovation and interconnected cycles. So kind of like all these things need to be considered when looking at entrepreneurship. We looked at different stages. Not going to go into too much detail here, but one of the questions said looking at the sequence and stages of entrepreneurship. One sequence of events, taking it from one source from Pearson's 2019 state, there are various stages, including recognizing opportunities, and generating ideas, opportunities and ideas, looking at a feasibility analysis, and then developing an effective business model, and then carrying out a competitive analysis, looking at the marketplace and looking at Porter's 5-force model, for example. Next stage would be to completing a business plan, and then this would be followed by the preparing the proper ethical and legal foundation. How are you going to set the business up, and assessing a new venture's financial strength and viability, followed by building a new venture team and gathering financing or funding. So these you can see as a loose set of stages for the entrepreneurial process. Now we look at the entrepreneurial process, and we've looked at entrepreneurship, and we looked at entrepreneurs. We looked at the characteristics and the internal and external moderating and contextual factors. So really we need to look at the different types of startup firms, and I'm sure that a lot of you have covered a lot of these already before. But let's just look at some of the startup firms in the private and social enterprise sector. When we are looking at these startup firms, we can see entrepreneurial firms, we can see lifestyle firms, and we can see salary substitute firms. Salary substitute firms that basically provide their owner or owners a similar level of income to what they would have been able to earn in a convenient job. Salary substitute. And here the people don't really want to report to someone else. They don't want to travel into work. They want their own independence, and they want their own freedom to conduct their own way, as long as they can still maintain the level of income that they had before when they were working. Lifestyle firms, firms that provide their owners or owners the opportunity to pursue a particular lifestyle and make a living at it. So a specific lifestyle that they want to live. And it might mean that they may not be able to achieve that from the job that they were working in. So they have this job, this company, and their company brings in X amount of profit to allow them certain things to be able to do, 2 or 3 holidays a year, doing this activity or that activity, because they have the financial resources to do that. Entrepreneurial firms that bring new products and services to the market by creating, and seizing opportunity regardless of the resources they currently control. That can be very fulfilling in itself, to be able to identify what the needs are of consumers and then to create a product and then to launch it on the marketplace is one of the most satisfying things possibly. I mean, it is a good feeling to be able to do that. When we look at firms, so we've looked at the different entrepreneurial firms, but how are you going to set this up? If we look at the market sectors in the UK, you have the public sector, you have the private sector, and you have the social enterprise sector. The public sector is more public-owned organisations, national health, schools, government, councils, fire service, police, and so on and so forth. You have the private sector. The private sector, and different types of organisational structures: a sole trader, a partnership, a private limited company, a public limited company, a private limited company. Then you have the social enterprise sector, charitable organisations, and private limited companies by guarantee, limited by guarantee. So, in the private sector, we've got the sole trader, partnership, partnership by limited liability partnership. You have the private limited company and the public limited company, and in the social enterprise or non-profit, you have charitable organisations and private limited companies limited by guarantee. So when we look at this, things that must be taken into consideration would include the cost of setting up and maintaining the legal form, the extent to which personal assets can be shielded from the liabilities of the business, tax considerations, and a number of types of investors involved. So this is all to do with how you set up a business. If it's going to be limited liability or non-limited liability, if you're acting as a sole trader, or if you're acting as a partnership, how are you going to set this business up? Because each of them have implications in terms of cost of setting up a limited liability company, but the advantages of a limited liability company in terms of limiting the liability of your debts to the company itself, because the company is seen in the eyes of the law as a separate legal entity, and you are not seen to be the owner of the company. In terms of you're not seen to be the person at the head of the company. So the company itself is a separate person. So you are not that person. The company is a separate legal entity. And so if the company had debts, then as long as you don't have, as a director, ties into you being responsible for those debts, then as it would stand, the company would be responsible for those debts. And if they had debts and the bailiffs came in to try and recuperate those debts, then they could only take the assets of the company, and they couldn't come to your own personal home to take your own personal goods. But then going ahead and setting up a limited liability company means you have to register, you have to fill out a memorandum of association, articles of association, statement of compliance. You need to fill out the list of registers of the registered shareholders, the list of officers in the building, complete and document sign the new document name, and a variety of different documentation, which are pretty standard because you can buy them off the shelf, and so they can be all done for you, so that's not too difficult. But you still have responsibilities in terms of making sure once a yearly that you fill out and you provide your profit and loss account and balance sheet, and sending them to Companies House as well as to the government in terms of their 365A form. And also, you could then, as a limited company, be depending upon your profits, have to pay taxes and the different tax rates depending upon which industry you're in. So and what the tax rate is at the moment. So you need to bear in mind, what system you want to go for and why. So let's have a look at some. So again, some of the advantages and disadvantages. Creating one is easy and inexpensive. The owner maintains complete control of the business and retains all the profits. But as a self-employed person, he would need to obviously declare his profits and his expenses, and pay a certain amount of tax as an individual at the end of the financial year. At the end of the year, business losses can be deducted against sole proprietors' other source of income, and also if you have the business is easy to dissolve. There's another advantage, and it's not subject to double taxation. Okay, and disadvantages include, the liability of the owner's part is unlimited, so it's not limited, which basically means that if you took out a £10,000 loan and you have assets like your house and furniture and so on and so forth, and your business goes down, you're still liable to pay that loan that you've taken out as an individual. So it could go to court, the bailiffs could be called in, and they could come to your house to take your assets that you have in your own home. The business relies on the skills and abilities of one single owner to be successful. Of course, the owner can hire employees, but who have additional skills and abilities. Raising capital can be difficult. The business ends at the owner's death or loss or interest in the business. The liquidity of the owner's investment is low. Partnerships, generally speaking, when we're looking at partnerships, creating one is relatively easy and inexpensive compared to a corporation or a limited liability company. The skills, abilities of more than one individual are available to the firm, so that's good. You've got more people involved in there. Having more than one owner, it will make it easier to raise funds. Business losses can be deducted against the partner's other sources of income, and it is not just subject to a double taxation. But the primary advantage is that it's not just dependent upon one single person for survival. And the primary disadvantage is that all the partners are liable for the partnership's debts and obligations, so they can come after whoever has the money to pay. When we think of limited partnerships, well, this is a modified form of a general partnership. The major difference between the two is that a limited partnership includes two classes of owners: general partners and limited partners. The general partners are liable for the debts and obligations of the partnership, but the limited partners are only liable for the amount they've invested. So, good. I prefer, if I was going to go into partnership and I was going to be a silent partner, I would prefer to be a limited partner, so that the money that I've invested, if the business doesn't go well, then I'm only limited to the liability of the money that I have invested. When we look at a limited company, this is the corporation. It's a set of legal entity organized under the authority of Companies House. So Companies House Act 2006, in terms of a company completing all the necessary documentation, and you do get limited liability, which can protect you as an individual, but there is various documentation that you need to complete. The memorandum of association, articles of association, statement of compliance, list of shareholders, list of officers in the building, and various other documentation as well. And that needs to be updated once a year, otherwise fines can be given, as well as full set amended sets of accounts can be submitted to Companies House. You don't have to have the full set of accounts being shown on Companies House. And also you need to submit your accounts, which is done in a slightly different way to the account, how you do the accounts at Companies House, because in the profit and loss account, on the accounts, you can have the depreciation in the profit and loss account, in the administration costs in the profit and loss account to Companies House, but when you do the depreciation going to the government, you don't put the depreciation in the profit and loss account. The depreciation is done outside of the not within the profit and loss account, so it's calculated slightly differently, but it all adds up to the same. Disadvantages of a limited company: setting up and maintaining is more difficult than a sole trader or partnership. Business losses cannot be deducted against the shareholder or other sources of income. Income is subject to double taxation, meaning that it is taxed at the corporate and at the shareholders level. Small, shareholders typically have little voice in the management of the firm. And the tax accounting can be complicated. Now, when we look at, the importance of the setup, just going back slightly, when we look at, charitable organizations like Oxfam are part of the social enterprise sector. And the social enterprise sector, the setup there would be a setup by guarantee. So they are guaranteed legal entities, and they don't pay any they don't have any sources of profit, so they don't pay any tax, and they don't have any retained earnings that go into the equity side of the balance sheet. Whereas a private limited company by guarantee in the social enterprise sector can make profits and will be taxed and can have retained earnings that go into the equity side of the balance sheet. So normally in the balance sheet you have the current assets plus fixed assets plus current assets, which gives you your total assets, which will equal your total liabilities plus equity. And your equity, you can gain from the investors that have invested money into the company and the shareholders, as well as retained earnings that go back into the balance sheet. The main difference between the social enterprise, private, limited by guarantee company, which are making a profit, which you could say is the same as a limited company in the private sector, but the difference being that the private limited company by guarantee in the social enterprise sector, in the memorandum of association, will state the core mission vision of the organization being a social enterprise, and there will be certain restrictions in terms of what they can and can't do. Okay, so now let's look at the importance to the UK economy. The importance of small to medium enterprises to the UK economy includes that the service industries accounted for 74% of businesses, 79% of employment, and 71% of turnover. So we can see, in terms of the small to medium enterprises, there's a huge amount of service industries with a huge amount of employment and a huge amount of turnover. Manufacturing sector accounted for 5% of businesses, 10% of employment, and 16% of turnover. And there were 351,000 business births and 246,000 business deaths in 2014. SMEs to the UK economy. There were 5.4 million businesses in the UK. Over 99% of businesses are small or medium. Okay, 99% of businesses are small or medium. Therefore employing from 0 to 249 people. 5.1 million people, 95% of businesses were micro businesses employing 0 to 9 people. Micro businesses accounted for 33% of employment and 18% of turnover. So when we look at small to medium enterprises, we can see that, but even if we take micro and small enterprises will represent 99% of businesses throughout the whole of the UK businesses. In London there were 1,434 businesses per 10,000 resident adults. In the northeast, there were 629 per 10,000 resident adults. So new records for entrepreneurship in the UK. High levels in growth in Yorkshire and Humberside and the East Midlands. 581,000 odd businesses were registered with Companies House in 2014, beating the previous record of 526,000. So it's definitely an increase from 2013 and 484,000 in 2012 of entrepreneur type firms of the micro level. New records for entrepreneurship in the UK. London and South East, maintain entrepreneurial powerhouse status, for 184,671 businesses. Birmingham tops the best performing cities out of the South East, 18,337. And entrepreneurial activity in Manchester booming, making it the hotspot of the North, 13,054. So we've looked at these type. We kind of gone through. We started off talking about entrepreneurship and then went back onto entrepreneurs, looked at the characteristics and skills, and then the internal and external moderating factors and contextual factors of motivations of entrepreneurs and why they do what they do. We've kind of looked at the different types of entrepreneurship and their structure. The cyclical circles, the processes. It's about a business activity, getting things done. Now we can look at the different, and then we looked at the different types of setups in terms of sole traders, partnerships, private limited companies, private partnerships, public limited companies, and social enterprise organizations. And now we're kind of looking at, so we've set the business up. Now we're talking about the different types of, typologies of entrepreneurs. And this one we look at Miles and Snow, 1992, who did look at the different views in terms of how companies could kind of like adapt themselves in terms of what type of what is their culture, what is their mission, how are they going to act, and how are they going to behave. And Myers and Snow looks at kind of like 4 different strategy types of organizations. They look at the prospector, the defender, the analyzer, and the reactor. And the prospector is like the company that's really going for innovation and growth. They're looking for, searches for new markets and new growth opportunities, and thus they encourage risk taking. The defender, they kind of like sit back a little bit and they defend and they protect their current markets. They're protecting their cash cows, maintain stable growth, and serves current customers. The analyzer is currently looking at and analyzing the market. They're looking at customer markets and current customers and satisfaction, with moderate emphasis on innovation. Moderate emphasis on innovation. The analyzer. And the reactor. The reactor is a risky one. There's no clear strategy. Reacts to changes in the environment. Drifts with events. They react to what is happening out there. So you can read that on the slides. Not going to read that. The analyzer is second in strategy. They adopt a matrix structure, dual technology core, and more of a mechanistic type structure, single core, cost efficiency type technologies. Now we've looked at the type of firm that you think you might be, whether it's a prospector, an analyzer, a defender, or kind of like a reactor. You're going to just sit back and wait for things to happen. Now we're saying to ourselves, really we need to think about, how you're going to conduct your marketing plan. We talked about the process for you presenting your product or service, but then you need to think about, once you've set up your business and then you've looked at the kind of philosophy you're going to adopt in terms of an analyzer, a reactor, a prospector, and so on and so forth, or a reactor. How are you going to conduct? What is the management process? So the management process is going to be establish your mission, your vision, your aims and your objectives, and then conducting your situation analysis. Your situation analysis including SWOT, PESTEL, and then a Porter's 5 force model, which gives you then you lead into your strategy. You can determine your strategy in terms of segmentation, targeting, and positioning, which then leads you into your implementation. Of your marketing mix, your basic marketing mix, your product, price, place, and promotion, which leads you into the process of controlling the whole management strategic process to ensure that your aims and objectives are actually met. So let's go into this into a little bit more detail. The mission. What are you trying to achieve? What is your business? What are you going to be doing over the next years? Your mission goal, mission statements, and the objectives and goals of an enterprise. So we need to look at what your Google to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Using our portfolio of brands to differentiate our content, services, and consumer products, we seek to develop the most creative, innovative, and profitable entertainment experiences and related products in the world. Our aim is to provide a fun and safe environment where our customers can enjoy food made with quality ingredients at affordable prices. If we look at the Tata Power in Mumbai, India, mission, we will become the most admired company delivering sustainable value by being the supplier and partner of choice, achieving excellence in safety, operations, and project management, focusing on the culture of sustainability, ensuring growth and delivering value to the stakeholders, caring for the community, their mission and their objectives. So, when we're looking at that, the next thing we have to say, well, after you've done your mission and your aims and objectives, you're saying to yourself, we need to do really a situation analysis. So we need to look at SWOT. And SWOT you've done before. If we look at this example here, SWOT college, internal factors and external factors. You're saying to yourself, well, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Strengths and weaknesses being internal to the business and opportunities and threats being external to the business. So you're saying to yourself, what are some of the main strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats in relation to your business? So you wouldn't just detail them all, but maybe the top 2 or 3. Here we're looking at Porter's 5-force model. Porter's 5-force model includes the threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, bargaining power suppliers, bargaining power buyers, and rivalry amongst competitors. So we've got Porter's 5, and so in the middle we've got rivalry amongst the competitors. At the top we've got threat of new entrants. On the right we've got bargaining power buyers, bargaining power suppliers, and threat of new substitutes. With a threat of new entrants, we're saying, time and how easy. What is the threat of other companies coming into your marketplace? If you're looking at the airline industry, well, competitors coming in the industry, new competitors coming in the industry, the threat of new entrants is going to be low because the investment, the time, the integration in terms of developing everything, in terms of the packages and where they want to go and the flight lines and so on and so forth takes a lot of time and investment, and having the planes and the infrastructure and everything is very costly. So the effect of new entrants here would be very low. Bargaining powers of the buyers, who has the power? This will depend on the number of customers, the size of the orders, differentiation between competitors, price sensitivity and cost of changing, because whoever has the power, if the customer can change and switch from one product to another, then you don't have the power, so you can't set the prices that you want. Substitutes, again you need to look at the the cost of change. Is the threat of substitutes high or low? This will depend on substitute performance, if the performance is good or bad, and if the cost of change is high or low. So if the cost of change is low and the substitute performance is good, then the threat of substitutes is high coming into this marketplace. Bargaining power of suppliers, the number of suppliers, the size of the suppliers, and your ability to substitute, and the cost of changing. So who has the power, who can negotiate with the suppliers to not just negotiate on the price, but negotiate in terms of the quality and the standards, and also integrating those people with yourselves as well. Who has the bargaining power. And rivalry amongst existing companies, number of competitors, the quality of differences, other differences, and switching costs and customer loyalty. How competitive is the industry, which could be a factor why you may not want to get in the industry, or maybe why you want to leave the industry. So after you've kind of looked at the situation analysis, including SWOT, you would obviously look at PESTEL as well. PESTEL being the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors, and saying, well, what's happening there? If you take the example of Brexit and the UK, you could say in terms of Toyota, for example, with Brexit and the political situation, how is that going to affect Toyota in the UK? Well, if Toyota have to export from their manufacturing in the UK to Europe, and they're going to be faced with additional tariff barriers, then this could affect Toyota in terms of increased costs and lower sales. Therefore, Toyota may want to react and move the manufacturing plant to Europe, for example. After you've looked at the the situation analysis, including SWOT and PESTEL and Porter's 5-Force model, the next thing you want to think about really is the marketing strategy. So the marketing strategy is going to be based on three parts. It's going to be based on your segmentation first, and then your targeting, and then your positioning in relation to your competitors. So segmentation has 4 different areas. Geographic segmentation, which area do you want to base your business in? Demographic segmentation, how are you basing it on? Age, gender, occupation, social economic groups. Behavioralistic segmentation, wanting a competitive edge, benefit sort, loyalty status, ready to buy, early adopters, and psychographic segmentation, depending upon their lifestyle, attitude, education level, and class. So these things you take into consideration. So if we look at a little bit more detail in terms of segmentation and customer demographics, we're saying to ourselves, what some of the demographics are you going to be focusing on? Are you going to be focusing on the age? Then if you are, then you need to split down the age categories, all the age categories that are available, from 0 to 14, 15 to 25, 26 to 35, and so on and so forth, depending upon what your age categories are. Family status, occupation, gender, male, female, or other gender classifications, statistical information, but in geographical demographics as well, in terms of where and location, but that's different from customer demographics. So occupation as well, and so you need to break these down into more detail. If you're going for family status, how many members are there in the family? 1 member family, 2 member family. So one children, 2 children. So family size of 3, family size of 4, family size of 5, for example. If we look at the psychographic segmentation, we're talking about really here lifestyle. What are the lifestyles in terms of the psychographic segmentation, which we've looked at some of the elements up above. So when we're looking at the SDP process, the segmentation, targeting, positioning process, we're saying to yourselves, ideally, the first thing that you want to do is to segment the marketplace up. is to say, well, how am I gonna segment the market? Look at some factors in terms of demographic variables. What variables am I going to use in demographic variables? Age, sex, occupation, and then geographic segmentation. Which area am I going to be targeting? Because you may have only a limited amount of resources. And then you might use psychographic segmentation and behavioralistic segmentation. And so you detail all the elements. You don't say at this stage which elements you're going to go for within demographic, geographic, psychographic, and behavioralistic. You just detail the 4 different areas and then the different variables within each segmentation you're going to go for, and then you break that down even more to say this is going to be split, for instance, demographic segmentation by gender, so by male and female. But then when you're targeting, you're saying that you're going to target female. And so you go into specific segmentation criteria and then the elements, and you say who are you going to target within those segmentation. And after you've done your targeting and you know exactly who you're targeting and what their profile are, then you look at your positioning strategy. How are you going to position yourself? How do you want your product or service to be viewed in terms of your target market? So if we look at Lucozade in the 70s and early 80s, Lucozade was seen as like a health drink for someone who was ill to get better. So I know when I went to the doctors once and I was a child, the doctor prescribed me having Lucozade. So Lucozade was seen as an energy drink to get better for people who were ill. But later on, Lucozade changed their positioning strategy to the sports drink, and you started to see it with the Olympics and Daley Thompson holding the Lucozade, and ads after that where they had repositioned themselves as the drink for sports people. And that's how people see it today. Lucozade is seen as a sports drink rather than as a drink for people to get better when they're ill. So how are you going to position yourself? Again, we've looked at the mission, vision. Come up with your your mission and your goals for your product or service. Do a brief SWOT, Pestel and Porter's analysis briefly, and then come up with your marketing strategy, your segmentation, your targeting and positioning, and then obviously after that is the implementation of the marketing mix, the product, the price, place and promotion. Product, when we're talking about the product, we're talking about the core product and the augmented product. We're talking about what is design, user experience, what is the branding, which is the augmented product. What about the packaging, and what is the core product? You've got the core product and the augmented product. What is going to be your whole product? Don't really want to go into too much detail, but you need to give some description of your core product and your augmented product, your branding. Pricing, what pricing strategy you're going to go for. You're going to have discounts, competitive pricing, value to buyer. Is it going to be, market penetration pricing, going in at a low price? Are you skimming the market, going for a high price and then coming down in price later? Are you using psychological pricing? Are you using cost-based pricing? What type of pricing strategy are you going to use and why? How does the customer act or buy? Where is going to be your location? Is it going to be in town? Is it going to be out of town? Why are you going to choose what locations you use? If you look at IKEA predominantly are based out of town in retail parks. You don't see IKEAs in town, and that's a predominant view in terms of what they do. But if you look at in Japan or China, if you look in China now, they have a slightly different strategy in terms of their location, where they locate their IKEA stores nearer to town centres in walking distance. And then promotion, what is going to be your promotion? What is going to be your message? A method of delivery message, timing and delivery, communications. And within your promotion, there are 5 elements. There's, promotions, which includes the advertising, what type of advertising mediums you're going to use. You have sales promotion, which is a temporary addition of value. What sales promotions? Buy one get one free, buy two 10% off, 50%. Are you going to have any promotions? You have public relations. PR, public relations, using social media, using Twitter, using all those mediums to get your message across and reach your target market. Personal sales and direct sales. So you have the the marketing mix here, which you should have covered already. Your product, your price, your place and promotion, which all need to relate to your target market. Your product and your branding, your pricing needs to relate to your target market. Your place and your promotion all needs to be consistent. These are not done independently, but these are all interlinked together. Your product, price, place and promotion all interlinked to meet your target market and then to meet your positioning strategy. So if we look at what we've done so far, we've looked at the keywords and broken down the question. We've looked at what we mean by entrepreneurship, and we've gone into detail in terms of the entrepreneur. We've gone into the internal and external contextual and moderating factors that affect entrepreneurs, as well as reviewing motivations, explicit and explicit and implicit. We've looked at processes and setup of innovation type organizations. We've looked at Miles and Snow 1992 in terms of different strategies one could take from an organizational perspective in terms of a prospector, defender, reactor, innovator, as well as we're looking at the initial setup in terms of a sole trader, partnership, private limited company, public limited company. And finally, we've looked at the overall strategy including the the mission, vision, situation analysis in terms of SWOT, PESTEL, and Porter's 5 force or competitor analysis, and then which led into the marketing strategy, looking at the segmentation in terms of demographic, psychographic, behavioralistic, and geographic, which then leads into your targeting strategy from those demographic from those variables, and then linking into your positioning strategy. And then finally the implementation of the marketing mix, which is focused on the basic standard mix, which were the product, price, place and promotion. So I hope that has given you an overview of what needs to be done for the first assignment. Many thanks today from Mr.